This week we're going to be continuing through the book of Mark, and I'm super excited this week because this is one of my favorite chapters of all of Scripture. And one of the reasons is there's just so much going on. From celebrating the Passover to Jesus instituting the Lord's Supper to the Garden of Gethsemane, Jesus being betrayed by Judas and arrested, Peter's denial, Jesus before the council, like just so much is going on. And yet throughout all of it, there was two major themes that stuck out to me as I was reading through it, particularly for these next couple weeks. And the first is that we all bail on Jesus, like we run away from Jesus, and that Jesus is faithful to us. And the best way I actually kind of envisioned Finding Nemo. If you're familiar with that movie, the whole plot is basically set up by the little fish Nemo swimming out and touching a boat that the dad warned him not to touch. And then so Nemo just swims out defiantly, smacks the boat, gives his dad the stink eye, starts swimming back, and a fisherman catches him. And then the rest of the movie is the dad, I believe the name is Marvin. Marlin? All right, not Marvin, Marlin. Shows how much I watch movies. But anyway, the dad ends up literally relentlessly pursuing Nemo the rest of the movie. And I very much see that in our relationship with Jesus, both in these passages and the passages we'll be looking at in the future. So we are going to be playing some hopscotch around the chapter. So we're going to be in Mark chapter 14 for the next couple of weeks. I definitely recommend that you read it on your own time just to have the full context. But we are going to be looking at 4 different disciples this week and how they bail on Jesus. And so the first one is Peter, and this is right after the Lord's Supper is instituted. And it's so we're picking up in Mark 14:26. You should be seeing scripture on my screen. Can somebody nod their head yes if that's true? Good. I saw one, that's all I didn't see. And so Mark 14:26-31, which is, and when they had sung a hymn, they went out to the Mount of Olives, and Jesus said to them, "You will all fall away, for it is written, I will strike the shepherd, and the sheep will be scattered. But after I am raised up, I will go before you to Galilee." Peter said to him, "Even though they all fall away, I will not." And Jesus said to him, "Truly I tell you, this very night, before the rooster crows twice, you will deny me 3 times. But he said emphatically, "If I must die with you, I will not deny you." And they all said the same. And so first couple things stick out. One, you will all fall away, for it is written. Like Jesus is promising that that the disciples will all fall away. But the reality is, while he was speaking to the 12 at that moment, this is true for each and every single one of us. At some point or another, we all fall away. We can't help it. We all are dealing with sin. Yet Peter is classic Peter, and he ends up refuting Jesus, saying, even though they will fall away, I will not. Like, he is adamant that he's going to get this right. And Jesus pretty much tells him, dude, you're going to do it 3 times before the night's over. And so jumping ahead after Jesus is arrested in Mark 14:66-72, surprise, surprise, Peter denies him 3 times. And as Peter was below in the courtyard, one of the servant girls of the high priest came, and seeing Peter warming himself, she looked at him and said, "You're with the Nazarene Jesus." But he denied it, saying, "I neither know or understand what you mean." And he went out into the gateway, and the rooster crowed. And the servant girl saw him, and he began again to say to the bystanders, "This man is one of them." But again, he denied it. And after a little while, the bystanders again said to Peter, "Certainly you are one of them, for you are a Galilean." But he began to invoke a curse on them. he began to invoke a curse on himself and to swear, "I do not know this man of whom you speak." And immediately the rooster crowed a second time. And Peter remembered how Jesus had said to him, "Before the rooster crows twice, you will deny me 3 times." And he broke down and wept. And so, surprise, surprise, Jesus was right. Peter does end up denying him 3 different times. But Peter is also probably one of the most relatable characters in Scripture. I was actually talking with Chad about this, and he's how I feel like I could relate to Peter, and he said that to me. He's like, I think everyone does. He's just really relatable. And it's because we see his flaws more often than anyone else's, at least out of the disciples. But in this case, Peter is absolutely on fire for Jesus. We see it with the, "I will not deny you, I will not deny you, I will not deny you." But then he falls short. Peter has a lot of zeal, but very little follow through. You all probably know someone like that. Maybe you have a friend who is always like, "Yeah, man, we'll hang out this weekend." And then they don't hang out. Or, "Yeah, let's go to a movie Friday night." Doesn't hang out. Like, you know people who are like this, who are friends, but don't always follow through. And the reason Peter didn't follow through here is it cost him something. In this case, probably would have been his life, or at the very least, he would have ended up in jail just for being associated with Jesus. And we all find ourselves in this spot when we are in a relationship with Jesus. Maybe our friends don't think Jesus is cool. Maybe our significant other isn't a Christian, or your parents might not believe that your faith is genuine. Maybe your teachers at school aren't Christians and they talk down on it. And it's a lot easier just to deny that we know him. But it's, as Christians, as someone who is in relationship with Jesus, it's not what we're meant to do. But I also think it's important to realize that Peter's love was genuine. That last line, "and he broke down and wept." Jesus was his best friend. Jesus completely changed his life. And he was absolutely ashamed and hurt that he bailed on Jesus. And again, this is what makes Peter so relatable. Imagine if you hurt your best friend. Like, just thinking about it, I'm sure you feel like you know you're at wrong. You feel it, you know it. Now imagine turning that up to 10 because you did, not only did you betray your best friend, but you betrayed the Messiah. It hurts. The next place we want to look is Mark 14:32 through 42. And this is Peter, James, and John joining Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane. And they went to a place called Gethsemane, and he said to his disciples, "Sit here while I pray." And he took with him Peter, James, and John, and began to be greatly distressed and troubled. And he said to him, "My soul is very sorrowful, even to death. Remain here and watch." And going a little further, he fell on the ground and prayed that if it was possible, the hour might pass from him. And he said, "Abba, Father, all things are possible with you. Remove this cup from me. Yet not what I will, but what you will." And he came and found them sleeping. And he said to Peter, "Simon, are you asleep? Could you not watch for 1 hour? Watch and pray that you may not enter temptation. The spirit is indeed willing, but the flesh is weak." And again, he went away and prayed, saying the same words. And again, he came and found them sleeping, for their eyes were very heavy, and they did not know what to answer him. And he came a third time and said, "Are you still sleeping and taking your rest? It is enough. The hour has come. The Son of Man is betrayed into the hands of sinners. Rise, let us go. Let us be going. See my betrayer at hand." And so here we're seeing the second time the disciples bail on Jesus here. And it's right here. He asked one thing, to stay awake, and yet he comes back and he finds them sleeping. The reality is, in this scenario, the disciples were invested in their relationship with Jesus, but they were not, or they were present in their relationship with Jesus, but not invested. And in this case, the reason they weren't invested was they were quite tired. As it says, the spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. They were tired. It's been a long day. They had just had a massive Passover feast. And they literally were fighting their own bodies to stay awake, but they failed. But maybe it's not always physical. Maybe if you're like me, one of the places I see myself doing this all the time is in prayer. Whether I'm praying privately or publicly, I have to literally fight to stay focused, particularly if someone else is praying. Like, for example, our home group, we always pray for each other at the end. And I struggle so hard to actually stay dialed in for the entirety while everyone's praying for each other. It's a beautiful thing. It's what we're called to do. It's part of living as a body of believers, but it's a struggle for me. And so we all find ourselves in this spot. But the second way we can easily bail on Jesus is by being present but not invested. So right after this scene, it goes, and immediately while he was still speaking, Judas came, one of the 12, and with him a crowd of swords and clubs from chief priests and the scribes and the elders. Now the betrayer has given them a sign, saying, the one I will kiss is the man. Seize him and lead him away under guard. And when he came up to him at once and said, Rabbi, and he kissed him. And they laid hands on him and seized him. But one of those who stood by drew his sword and struck the servant of the high priest and cut his ear off. And Jesus said to them, have you come out as against a robber with swords and clubs to capture me? Day after day I was with you in the temple teaching, and you did not seize me. But let the scriptures be fulfilled. And they left him and fled. And they all left him and fled. And a young man followed him with nothing but a linen cloth around his body, and they seized him. But he left the linen cloth and ran away naked. And so this is where we see our last two instances of the disciples bailing on their relationship with Jesus. First is Judas. He was 1 to 12, and he's most famous for being the betrayer of Jesus. But what breaks my heart in this passage is last week we saw him plotting, and now we see him in action. And it's the action that just breaks my heart. Now the betrayer had given them a sign saying, the one I kiss is the man. Seize him and lead him away under guard. And when he came, he went up to him at once and said, Rabbi, and kissed him. Judas approached him as a friend. Jesus had been with him for 3 years. Like, just imagine the scene. Imagine you're there. There's the 12 disciples in the garden. There's a bunch of men with swords and clubs coming in. And Judas, out of this giant crowd in the dark, is able to pick out Jesus. He knows Jesus well enough that in the dark with minimal light, like it's not like they had flashlights. At best, they had torches. He was able to pick out Jesus. And he greeted him as a friend who he respected. As he was betraying him, he greeted him as a man and a friend who he respected. And the reason why this one, I think, is the hardest for at least me to swallow is Judas followed Jesus, but never knew him. Like, he lived with him for 3 years. He followed him everywhere. They lived life together. But he never loved him. Ultimately, what he loved was money. And so when he had the opportunity to get some coin in his pocket, he took it. And my fear is that I shouldn't say my fear, but my prayer for y'all is that you never find yourself in this spot where you follow Jesus all your life, but you run into something that you think will give you more joy, more gratitude, make you feel whole, and that you trade your relationship with Jesus for that. Because ultimately, it will not bring you joy. It did not end well for Judas, but he bailed on Jesus by following him, but never loving him. And lastly, we see that they all ran away quite clearly. It's verse 50, and it says, and they all ran away. But I want to focus in on the part right after that. And a young man followed him with nothing but a linen cloth around his body. And they seized him, but he left the linen cloth and ran away naked. The reality is, this is probably the author modestly admitting that he also abandoned Jesus. He actually tried to follow him for a bit, But once he was grabbed and arrested, he literally ran away naked. That's it. Like, he left literally everything to get away. And as I read this, it took me back to the garden. It took me back to Eden, where Adam hid from God. And when God called him out, he asked, "Why are you hiding from me?" And Adam responded, "We were naked and ashamed, and so we hid." See, we all look to hide. Sin tells us we need to hide and be ashamed and run away. But God didn't design us for that. He designed us to be in that relationship with him. But they ran away because it felt like God was no longer in control. In this scene, it felt like God was no longer in control. And maybe you're feeling that right now with everything going on with COVID-19 and how our lives have been completely shut down. No more school, no more events, just complete shutdown. Seems like the world's in complete chaos. It's easy to feel that God's not there, that God's not in control. But when the disciples fled because it looked like God was no longer in control, they didn't realize what God was doing. That not only did he need to get arrested, but he had to go and die. And that this was the most beautiful plan that could ever happen because it was the only thing that could truly save them. I can't tell you what God's doing with COVID-19, but I do want to encourage you not to flee because God is in control. Because Jesus doesn't bail on us, and we will see that in the upcoming weeks. Please join me in prayer. Dear Lord, thank you for this night. Thank you for the opportunity to get together, to hang out on Zoom. Lord, thank you most importantly for pursuing us like the dad in Finding Nemo, going to the ends of the earth to make sure that you have your children who you love. Lord, when we are looking to bail, when we're looking to run, when we're naked and ashamed, I pray that your love covers us and brings us to peace that doesn't make any sense, but that we have full comfort and confidence in you and the relationship we have with you. And I lift this up in your name.